Uh-oh.
Okay, and now it's time for our weekend recap. We're going to kick it off with the WBC Interim Super Flyweight contest between then WBC Interim Champion Adelaida Ruiz and Virginia Fuchs. The prediction stuck. I went with Virginia Fuchs to win a points decision, and she did just that. In the opening stanza, we saw both girls go hell for leather. We saw them both dart out of their corners and meet each other in the center of the ring, trading blows. It seemed to me like Virginia was getting the better end of those exchanges, but if you were listening to the ringside commentary, it seems like the announcers felt Ruiz was getting the better end of those exchanges. I had it 2-0 for Virginia Fuchs after the first 2 rounds. It could have been 2-0 or 1-1. 2-1 after 3, as Virginia Fuchs was landing the straight left hand, what is her backhand, with some regularity. Remember that Virginia is a southpaw, whereas Adelaida is an orthodox fighter that had its role to play as Virginia Fuchs would move to her right on the outside of Adelaida Ruiz's left, allowing her to cut that angle and get in with the straight left hand,
her power hand,
throughout the course of the fight. I did feel like Ginny was making things a little bit harder than they needed to be.
I felt like she was trading with Adelaida a little bit too much, where she really doesn't have to. She's lighter on her feet, has better movement than Adelaida.
So when she's boxing, she's creating clear separation between herself and Adelaida, as opposed to trading punches mid-range to inside, where it was a bit more difficult to separate them. That yes, Ginny's landing, but so is Adelaida. 2 rounds to 1 after 3 rounds, 3 rounds to 1 after 4 in favor of Virginia Fuchs, who in the last 2 rounds looked very good. Boxing and not just charging and trading with Adelaida. It's when she was moving and jabbing that Ruiz was lost in the sauce. And Adelaida Ruiz, she started to look a bit tired too, a bit sluggish, where Ginny's cardio was holding up. 3-1 after 4 rounds, 4-1 after 5. And as I'm watching this thing, I'm wondering, will Virginia Fuchs get a fair shake? Is she doing enough for the judges? Because while she might be doing enough for me on my scorecard, how I see it, you have to remember they were in LA yesterday.
Adelaida Ruiz is from LA. She's the Los Angelino in the ring.
So I gave Virginia Fuchs the 5th round. I gave Virginia Fuchs the 6th round. I gave Adelaida Ruiz the 7th round, as she was catching Virginia Fuchs hard, catching her coming in and getting the better end of the exchanges.
I gave Adelaida Ruiz the 7th round, the 8th round. The 8th looked like a swing round to me that you could have swung either way, so you can go ahead and swing that one to Adelaida.
Could give Adelaida the 8th round. I gave Virginia Fuchs the 9th. She was on her toes, moving around, landing 2 punches at a time, and it seemed to me like she won that round comprehensively, as well as the 10th and final round.
The final tally.
That if I gave Adelaida Ruiz every possible consideration on my own scorecard, the most I could give her was 3, maybe 4 rounds. 3, really.
And 3 feels generous.
Because for me, the distinction was clear. While Adelaida Ruiz might have been the stronger, more heavy-handed puncher of the two, that's really all she had. All she had was power.
The cleaner, clearer work and more consistent work was coming from Virginia.
It was the movement, cutting angles, darting off to her right to bring over that left, that straight left hand down the middle that Virginia landed with some regularity. The condition of the fighters, that even though Virginia doesn't have anywhere near as many fights as Adelaida, it was Virginia's cardio that held up.
The pace of the match as well, the terms at which the fight was being fought, it seemed to me like Virginia was the one in control of that. She was backing up Adelaida.
Even if Adelaida was getting in with a few good shots here and there, it still felt like the fight was being fought more on Virginia's terms than Adelaida's.
Virginia showed the better boxing, better jab, better straight, better movement.
Though the victory came at a cost for the captain, as Virginia Fuchs is called apparently. She suffered a pretty bad injury in the opening rounds. Broken thumb.
Ouch.
With the bone protruding.
You wouldn't have known it from the way that she fought that she was fighting injured most of the fight. She didn't stop using that hand.
Her right hand, what is her jab hand, because she fights out of the southpaw stance, she didn't stop using it in spite of the injury.
She's a trooper. She's a warrior.
And now, WBC interim champion, questions that need answers. How long will it take for Virginia Fuchs to recover from that thumb injury? What's the prognosis? Because it feels like it's safe to say she's going to sit out the rest of this year.
This fight.
This was for WBC interim status en route to an Ashley Gonzalez fight. Ashley Gonzalez, this division's full WBC champion. How long will it take for Virginia to recuperate, and how long will it take to make the fight between them, as well as will Matchroom pay for it?
Because they paid for this. Even though neither Virginia or Adelaida is under contract with Matchroom, they made this happen.
So will they make that happen? And if they do, does the winner of the fight get a Matchroom contract?
Questions that need answers.
Congratulations to Virginia Fuchs. The prediction stuck. I felt she would win a points decision, and she delivered. Elsewhere on that same show, we saw Mexican up-and-comer Sugar Munguez
Campaigns at super featherweight.
take on seasoned veteran and former world title challenger Miguel Marriaga, who was in a world of trouble after just 6 rounds. That's how long the contest lasted.
If you've never actually seen Sugar in action before, almost immediately what you notice is he's a pressure fighter. He's a pressure guy, a volume guy.
Though a very crafty one, not as crude or simple as some other pressure fighters.
Knows how to cut off the ring.
Instead of just following Miguel in a straight line, you notice how he makes a beeline, moving parallel to Miguel, moving with him.
In the direction that he wants to go, where he wants to be, to meet him there, and thereby effectively keep the pressure on.
Keep on him. It's very subtle, the distinction between just following the opponent and cutting off the ring. As much as you hear about it, many don't know how to make that distinction.
If you're just following the guy, you're going to end up chasing him all night.
Whereas in cutting off the ring, you limit their exits and eventually you can pin them down and unload. The way Sugar Munguez was unloading yesterday on Miguel Marriaga, very brave soul, who was floored in the 4th round off a left hook, right hand combination. Sugar got off a left hook to the body, followed it up with a right hand over the top that he bounced off the top of Miguel Marriaga's head. He went down hard. I was surprised that Miguel got up.
He wouldn't give up. He didn't want to quit.
Though he could have. He could have stayed down there in what was a losing effort. This was all Sugar Munguez. All Sugar Munguez for all of 6 rounds, which is how long the contest lasted before Miguel's people decided they've got to save him from himself. He's too tough. He's too brave for his own good, and he ain't going to win this fight, so there's no need to let him keep taking punishment.
And the variety of punches from Sugar Munguez, very good. Very short, tight hooks, often getting in.
Upstairs and downstairs. Defense as well. You don't often associate defense with pressure fighters and pressure fighting as they're offensively minded fighters, but we saw good defense from Sugar as he was closing the distance.
Doing a very good job of catching Miguel Marriaga's shots on the arms and gloves, parrying those shots, not getting hit with punches that he doesn't need to get hit with while coming forward.
Sporting a professional record of 27 wins with 1 loss, no draws, 27 knockouts, having never been knocked out in 28 professional bouts. Every single fight that Sugar has won, he's won by way of knockout. Yesterday was no different.
Who beat him?
It was Hiram Gallardo way back there in 2018 that won a points decision against Sugar Munguez. That was a long time ago, roughly 17 or 18 fights ago.
Needless to say that Sugar Munguia has rebounded since then. He's on a hot streak, a winning streak, 6 for 6 in his last 6, winning all 6 by way of knockout. Some nuances that need an explanation. Sugar Munguia was last in action before yesterday's fight. He was last in action opposite the ring Shavkat Rakhimov, but that contest is not reflected in his BoxRec record. Why isn't it there?
He had a fight in between the Oscar Escandón fight and yesterday's Miguel Marriaga fight, what was the Shavkat Rakhimov fight, an IBF final eliminator that crowned him the IBF's mandatory challenger.
I don't know why it isn't there.
And because it isn't there, I don't know what this means. Is he still the IBF's mandatory challenger, or has the outcome of that match been rescinded? Because as far as I knew, Sugar is the mandatory challenger for Anthony Cacace,
IBF champion.
It was my understanding that Sugar was paid to step aside to allow Josh Warrington to fight Cacace for his IBF title, and as a result of that, Sugar would be the mandatory challenger for whoever wins that fight, whether it's Cacace or Warrington.
That was my understanding.
Though because the Rakhimov fight has been stricken from the record, and because yesterday's fight was not a super featherweight fight, it was fought just above super featherweight, it was fought at lightweight.
Is he not the mandatory anymore?
Really not sure, because if he still is, if he is the mandatory in spite of these nuances, well, I don't envy the winner of Cacace versus Warrington. Whoever it is, they might have to deal with Sugar, and I think Sugar would beat them both. I think Sugar would knock them both out.
If they do have to fight him.
He's an excellent pressure fighter, craftier and smarter than your average pressure fighter, say Isaac Cruz.
A more simple fighter with less bells and whistles than Sugar. More simple, but still having that base style.
Sugar looks the real thing to me. He looks like a world-class operator, a world-class pressure fighter, though here and now I don't even know if he's still in world title contention. Nevertheless, that was a great showing yesterday. That was a great performance. This guy's made for TV.
Congratulations to him.
Finally, in the main event of that same show, we saw unbeaten up-and-comer Diego Pacheco score a highlight reel knockout off a counter left hand to the body. We saw him score a knockout over seasoned veteran Maciej Sulecki of Poland, who, as I recall, some years ago, gave Daniel Jacobs all he could handle. He went the distance with Demetrius Andrade, but was unable to do that yesterday with Diego Pacheco.
This looked like a return to the Diego Pacheco that we're all used to, the one that knocked out Marcelo Caceres.
He looked better yesterday than he did in his last fight, the one before this one, with Sean McKelman, where he got hit with a lot of punches that he really didn't need to get hit with. Defensively, he was better yesterday. Offensively, he was better yesterday.
Better than he was in his last fight.
Very long and limber fighter for 168 pounds. Diego has a lot of height, a lot of length that he used yesterday to effectively manage the distance against Sulecki, who probably isn't accustomed to being the smaller man in the ring.
Though he was yesterday.
And as a result of that, took an offensive approach from the start, trying to get aggressive with Diego, close the distance on Diego, who was moving and jabbing and setting him up for counters.
Being effective.
Not making himself a stationary target, not standing in one spot, not just selling out to trade punches. No, Diego boxed very well yesterday. Showed good offense, showed good defense, bouncing punches off the shoulder, countering in kind, and how he finished. A counter left hand to the body. Sulecki never saw it coming. Hit the deck. Couldn't recover.
He's never been stopped. Before yesterday, Maciej Sulecki had never been stopped. I think this was a good acid test for Diego, and I think he passed it with flying colors. I think he looked really good yesterday. But some want to say that Sulecki was a shot fighter. I saw Boxing Insider Rick Glacier. How the hell was he a shot fighter?
So after the fight, Eddie Hearn starts up about a potential Pacheco versus Munguia fight. And that's what Rick Glacier responded to, saying that Eddie Hearn needs to stop with the bluster. He would never put Pacheco in there with Munguia.
Why wouldn't he put Pacheco in there with Munguia?
He's putting Joe Cordina in there with Shakur Stevenson.
Eddie doesn't match his fighters soft. If they want to fight, he lets them fight. That's why Sandy Ryan is going over to Top Rank for a Michaela Mayer fight.
He doesn't match his fighters soft. Rick went on to say that Sulecki was so shot that when the body shot landed, he just rolled over and gave up or whatever he's trying to say. Rick Glacier is hit or miss depending on who he's talking about.
A body shot like that would have floored most super middleweights. A body shot that lands flush like that one did.
I think he was just looking for an avenue to criticize one of Eddie Hearn's boys, one of Eddie Hearn's fighters. There's nothing to suggest that Maciej Sulecki was a shot fighter going into this fight, as he was coming off several victories, a string of wins, and he had never been stopped before.
So where do you get that he was shot?
And where do you get that Diego needs to be matched better? He needs better competition when yesterday he stopped a guy that had never been stopped. He stopped a guy that Daniel Jacobs and Demetrius Andre didn't fight until they were in their 30s. He's in his early 20s.
Diego's only 23 years old. Who do you want he should match him with, Godzilla?
Who should he have fought already at 23 years old? So that when Eddie Hearn says he wants to match him against Jaime Munguia, you poo-poo all over the idea. It seems to me that you're just a malcontent looking for something negative to say because you don't like Eddie Hearn, and you don't like that his fighter looked world-class yesterday.
Why doesn't he like Eddie Hearn?
Likely because he has professional relationships with other people, other promoters that happen to be Eddie Hearn's rivals.
He's adopting their beef.
Don't you notice that he has nothing but negative things to say about Eddie Hearn while lavishing praise on other people, other guys that just so happen to be his rivals?
You'd be hard-pressed to find objective analysis and objective opinions in the sport of boxing, as oftentimes they're not from the people within boxing. So while Rick every now and then provides some really good intel, inside intel, his annotations, his anecdotes
are not so good. Remember, he told you Fury was going to beat Usyk, but what did I tell you?
What have I been telling you?
Not just the week of the fight, but a year the fight happened. No, I've been saying it for years. Usyk beats Fury.
Rick didn't think so because he happens to be sweet on Fury. He picked Fury to win.
I didn't. I think Rick Glacier's inside intel, oftentimes it's good, but his analysis of a fight, his annotations, are not so good. He's hit or miss depending on who and what he's talking about. Near as I can tell, Diego Pacheco is looking better and better. He looked world-class yesterday.
And Rick doesn't like it because he happens to be promoted by Eddie Hearn, who he also doesn't like.
So when Eddie Hearn floats the idea that Diego might face Jaime Munguia sometime down the line,
that's not a bad show.
You have to take whatever Rick says with a grain of salt if it involves Eddie Hearn or one of his fighters. It's not a bad idea, and I wouldn't count out Diego completely in that fight because while Jaime might be a lot more experienced than Diego, don't forget that Jaime's the guy who needed a gift decision over Hennis Dogan.
Remember him at 154, Dennis Hogan?
And do you remember the Gabe Rosado fight? Do you remember that Jaime had to go balls to the wall with Gabe Rosado?
He didn't have it all his way with Gabe Rosado, so why am I supposed to think he's going to have it all his way with Diego? Near as I can tell, that fight isn't next anyway. By the time that fight happens, if it does, Diego might be an even more experienced fighter and an even more polished boxer.
I wouldn't count him out just yet, the way that Rick Glacier is counting him out, for no other reason than he just so happens to be Eddie's fighter, because underneath it all, that's what it is.
Jaime's about to fight Bazinian on the top-ranked side of things. We have to see how he makes out in that fight.
Personally, I think it's a little premature. It's a little too soon to weigh in on what that fight might look like, but we know what Diego looked like yesterday. He looked good. He looked world-class, like he usually looks. His last fight aside before this one.
Just a hiccup.
An off night, because yesterday, he looked alright. He looked good. Got the stoppage against a guy who's never been stopped. What do you want?
You want he should shoot lasers out of his eyes and lightning out of his ass?
Give me a break.